So welcome. Today is July 11th, 2017, and this is the July Radnor Township School District Policy Committee meeting. We'd like to start off by welcoming back Mr. Christofko. He's here this month, guest appearance, I guess. And Dr. Rabarczyk is now our single liaison. Dr. Stevenson has new responsibilities in the district. So Dr. Rabarczyk, if you want to start us off with some remarks. Thank you.
Sure, and good afternoon and welcome. Our agenda today includes a couple policies that we've seen before and one that we're bringing back just to have some discussion about. But we're bringing field trips back to the table as we now have included the opportunity for the superintendent, Mr. Batchelor, to approve field trips if they come in a timely manner that do not meet the next board agenda, that they're not able to be approved by you, so he can approve and can be ratified at the following board meeting, at the next board meeting. We're also including language about volunteers and also the policy, newer revised policy about use of medications. So that will also be included. We're bringing back use of medications for a second read to review that information. There was some new language put into it in between the last meeting and this meeting, and we'll go over that information. And then we have brought back policy 915. This is not to move forward for a first or second read of any type. This is more of just a discussion about the revisions that have been made to it as we shortened it down greatly. So I look forward to what you have to share about that policy. And then we'll be ending our meeting today with a discussion that was brought up a couple months back about policy versus best practices. And so we're just going to talk about when it's the most effective to develop policy and administrative regulations versus acknowledging best practices and the procedures to be implemented in the district and its daily operations.
All righty. And I'd like to bring up any public comment. Thank you for signing in, Mrs. Sherry, before. Appreciate that. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Judy Sherry, Governor Circle, Newtown Square. My first is a question. What is the policy regarding right-to-know requests and the use of the district's solicitor? Are they routinely or rarely sent to the solicitor for review? Second question is, will there be job descriptions for the new organizational chart? And my third is my lengthy point today, and it's regarding cross-referencing. The minutes of the Radnor Township School District Policy Committee meeting dated December 9th, 2014. That's almost 3 years ago. We had board members in attendance. We had Ken Roos from the solicitor's office. And my comment at that meeting, as put into the minutes, was suggested that policy references should be reviewed for accuracy in that some policies no longer exist. For example, policy 112 no longer exists, but is referenced in policy number 146. So what this means is, as you all know, the policies have next to them oftentimes either state laws or policies that we have that sort of just provide the justification, the rationale behind the policy so that you can go back and take a look at those. And my point then was, we have some policies out there that are referencing policies that aren't there anymore. So we really should go back and take a look and make sure that everything is accurate. Now that year, in April, there were no minutes posted, so I couldn't tell for sure, but my sense is I brought this up again in April because in May 12th Policy Committee's meeting date, May 12, 2015, the minutes state, and the agenda stated, due to time constraints, discussion was postponed on the following agenda items. Agenda item number 9, policy cross-referencing. So that was in May of that year, 2015. Then in August 11th, 2015, I again requested a time frame for reviewing policies which cross-referenced policies that no longer exist. I brought that up again in August of that year. It wasn't on the agenda, so I was starting to think, oh, I guess it just fell off. Then in September 2015, it was listed on the agenda. However, it was pushed for future discussion, policy cross-referencing. So I was reviewing something else, and I just happened to come across the policy that I specifically mentioned as an example. And I thought, you know what, I think I'll check to see if that policy was updated, because, sometimes this is housekeeping. It seems like it's a minor thing, but sometimes it seems like, wow, a lot of this policy, it's important that if it references something, that exists. So the first policy I looked at was Policy 146, Student Services References. And sure enough, 112 is mentioned on that page. It doesn't exist. So I went down the list that I had compiled way back almost 3 years ago, and I intend to just go through them. There are 12 more. Policy 247, anti-hazing references. It references Policy 122. That doesn't exist. Policy on Publications Program, Policy 902, references 127. That no longer exists. Policy 105.1, page 2, Curriculum Review by Parents and Guardians and Students, references 127. As I just said, it doesn't exist. Policy 625, Procurement Cards, references Policy 317, does not exist. Policy 625, Procurement Cards, also references Policy 517, that doesn't exist. Policy 348, Unlawful Harassment, references 317, and that doesn't exist. Also, it references 517, so this is still unlawful harassment. That doesn't exist. Policy 221, Dress and Grooming, references Policies 325 and 425, which do not exist. And Policy 619, District Audit, references 2 times Policy 801, that does not exist, and Policy 007, Distribution.
What was that policy again, Judy?
619. Policy 007, Distribution, references 801, which does not exist. Then I actually looked back at Policy 006, which is now, used to be meetings, now it's meetings and public participation. And there it references Policy 004, which now has become new member orientation. But it references that related to removing a school director. Now, I don't know if that would really be something that you'd want to bring forward to a brand new school board member, but that's what it does. It references removing a school director, and then 004, and then, it 2 times references 004, removing a school director because a vacancy exists. So I'm not sure that that's really where you want to go, and that's the correct reference. So I would go back and check that as well. So that's my list that I compiled that still seem to talk about policies that are not relevant, and it's been a long time. So I'm going to again ask for a time frame when these policies are going to be addressed, because I think it's really important that we at least review them. Oh, one other thing, since I'm the only one here. Because I was looking at dress and grooming, and that was one of the policies I think that I mentioned, that has policies that no longer exist. And under pupils in dress and grooming, under the pupils policy, it says, quote, Staff members shall be instructed to demonstrate by example positive attitudes toward neatness, cleanliness, propriety, modesty, and a good sense in attire and appearance. So I wonder why a staff directive would appear under a pupil's policy. And then only the pupil's policy and the support employees have a dress and grooming policy. At least when I did a search, I couldn't find anything for the administration or professional staff. And I won't read you the support one, but they do have one. So in addition to having citing policies that don't exist, and that might be, I don't know, what was before, whether it was professional dress or whatever. But I think they should be reviewed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Krzyzewski, before we get started, I have two quick questions. One is it simply a matter of housekeeping, or can we not be changing policies unless we bring it up for review?
You wouldn't actually be changing the language of the policy. You'd just be eliminating a reference.
Okay, because I was under the impression that we really couldn't be doing that unless we brought it forward. So some of these have just not come up for review. We try to do our housekeeping
Right.
as we deal with them,
Yeah,
not, take the time. But that was because that was my understanding of it at the time.
Right.
Is that not accurate?
Yeah, if all you're going to do is eliminate a reference to a policy that doesn't exist any longer, it's okay to just eliminate the reference as long as you're not changing the context or text of the policy
Well,
itself.
that gets to the point of if the reference is within the wording of the policy, then that's changing the policy
That's right.
versus a cross-reference on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side.
That's
And
right.
that's what I'm talking about. A cross-reference that's made within the wording of the policy is a change to the policy, so we'd have to do the full review.
Yeah, I'm just
Or a-
referring to if it's on the left-hand side.
Thank you for
with
clarifying.
authority, if it has a policy there that no longer exists, you can just simply delete that, and you haven't actually changed the policy. But if
Okay.
the actual body of the policy refers to a policy that doesn't exist, then that would have to come back before the committee to actually change it and find out, that's a more substantive change.
Great, okay, thank you. I'd like to get started with the agenda. The question about the right-to-know policy, actually, I think is something that might be pertinent when we have our discussion at the end.
Okay.
All right, great. So are you ready to get started? Sure. Thanks.
Okay, we are going to start with policy number 121, field trips. This is being brought forward for a first reading. We're going to review and the revision of the policy as it incorporated as I recommended.
No, we need to approve the
no,
minutes real
approve
first.
minutes, true.
Did everyone have a chance to read the minutes, or is everyone okay with the June 13th minutes? Yes? Okay, so we'll move those we'll approve those as, move them as approved.
Okay. Again, that policy is being brought forward after it's been revised to incorporate the process of approving field trips, obtaining parent permission, approval of field trips that occur prior to the next business meeting, cross-referencing policy 916, volunteers, and policy 210, use of medications. And right now, that's the previous medications until the new medication policy is passed. But that will be hopefully in August, and then we can make that notation. And then the administrative regulations for field trips is being developed as we go over the summer, and we've incorporated some new language into there to make sure that we've hit the medication components. So I'll take any comments or recommendations in regards to the field trip policy.
Who'd like to start? Dave, do you have a few things it looks like?
But I'll hand them to you. They're
Okay.
typographical, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Amy, do you have?
Well, question number one was about the AR for 121, so thank you for asking that. I had, in the submission you gave us in May, quite a few comments on it, so if those still exist when the revised AR comes out, I know we don't have to approve them as a board, but maybe we could confer offline or something like
Sure,
that.
you're more than welcome to provide those so I can cross-reference
Okay.
as I'm developing the new
So we'll do that
AR.
at offline, okay. The other thing, I went back and watched the May Policy Committee meeting again, and you had mentioned then that you were planning to share with us, as we consider this policy, the trip approval and permission form, but you had forgotten to bring it in May. Is that something you still want us to look at before we?
That'll be part of the AR.
Oh, okay.
That'll be all one packet with an Appendix A, Appendix B, and so on.
Okay. Another comment I had was that in the May meeting, there was a pretty full discussion about Policy 231 and how that policy relates to 231, just as a reminder, is the social events and class trips policy, and how that relates to 121, which is field trips, and what to do about that. And there were a few different suggestions that came up. I think it landed on, from what I heard from Susan, that they're going to remain two separate policies.
Correct.
I'm not really sure of the rationale behind that. I'm not challenging it, but Susan said you might give some background on that. Aside from the background, I was wondering if it would be possible to give the policies two names that show clearly how different they are. Like one could, for example, my suggestion was that 121 could be, instead of field trips, curricular field trips, and maybe 231 could be social events and non-curricular field trips, just to help further distinguish those two policies from one another without having to read them. And even when you read them, it's still hard to tell, at least the way they're currently constructed. So would that be something that could be up for consideration?
We can definitely put that in there for consideration. And exactly what you just explained is the difference between those two policies. When I talked to Mr. Diasio, the difference was that field trips is based on curricular decisions. The social events and class trips are non-curricular. So they do have two separate entities in regards to how they're followed in permission and getting approval and everything. So that's why we kept them two separate.
So even if you
Policies.
don't title them differently, I remember from the May discussion that there was a suggestion that there be very clear defining language, like right up in the purpose. This one is curricular, this one is not, kind of thing. Is that anything like that that just really helps you tell the difference between a class trip and a field trip? Because somebody who's not privy to, hasn't been following the policy discussions and might be looking for information on something like that could be confused. I was.
Sure. And what we can do, Amy, is we can, in this policy, in the purpose, it does state the use for teaching and learning integral to the curriculum, and the class trips and social events, we can add a definition of what that would incur as they go forward with planning a trip like that.
Right, I guess I'm asking for a definition, but one that explicitly contrasts it to 121. Maybe something like, not to be confused with 121 field trips, something like that.
Oh,
It's
to
hard,
make
not leaving too much to
definitive
the
between-
imagination. That's just my bias, is the clearer, the better. They're more usable when they're super clear. So the other thing that I wanted to mention on field trips is that I know that in the May meeting that Julia and Mrs. Sherry had mentioned concern about the travel advisory caveat in the policy. And I may have missed it, but in this newest version, I'm not sure that was clarified.
So we approached that, and if you look on page 2 of 2 in the second paragraph, this was the language between myself and Mr. Diasio that we came up with.
Okay.
So we didn't have to put specific alerts in case they do change names. That basically gives the superintendent and his or her designee the right to cancel, postpone, modify, or terminate any field trip if the superintendent reasonably believes that not doing so might be in danger of students or district employees. So that way, he has the authority, or she has the authority to basically say, we're not doing this trip, there's some type of alert, or there's some type of travel ban, and it's not specific to any language. It's more of a directive from discretionary,
Would it
correct?
be possible to eliminate the sentence that's kind of redundant in under authority that says approval of out-of-country student trips is conditional on the fact that there is not a State Department travel advisory at the time of the trip? Because you go into more clear detail on the second page, in my opinion.
Okay.
I don't know how the rest of the committee feels about that.
Well, in addition, one of the things that I like about although I would wonder if you shouldn't put this, I guess, is it best under delegation of authority? I like the wording of the right to cancel. And I like that it's not restricted to an out-of-the-country student trip.
Correct. That would
Because
be
the
any-
reality is there could be a trip to DC or somewhere else.
Weather emergency, anything.
Correct. So I think it's better language. And yet, I think I agree with Amy, should we either delete what's in the authority or move the delegation of responsibility piece about the right to change it to authority? And Mike, I welcome your thoughts on this as well. If it's fine where it is, it's fine where it is.
Yeah, I think leaving it where it is in delegation of authority is the proper place, because the board is essentially giving the superintendent that authority to make that call as the need arises.
All right.
So are you leaving that sentence? Are you leaving that
No,
sentence?
we're going to leave the general language on page 2. I guess the question then becomes the language in authority about the out-of-country trips and the State Department advisory. That's not a term that actually exists in the State Department. That was,
that
I
was-
believe, the comment that was brought forth a month or two ago.
Yeah, I think if you're going to leave that language there, it should just simply reference section 4.
And
So, conditioned on satisfaction, or the superintendent's satisfaction that the conditions set forth in paragraph 4 of this policy have been satisfied, or something like that.
yeah, and I want to say that might have been an error with Ed and I speaking, because I think that was meant to be taken out. So
Could come out.
yeah.
I think it. I think it should. I think the delegation is clear enough.
Yep.
Okay. Amy, was there anything else?
Yes, and in the May meeting, we were going back at some point, I heard the comment made that we were going to go back at some point in this policy to add a reference to where information about funding a field trip could be found. And given that we don't have a funding policy at the moment, or guidelines per se, could we come up with a statement like this? Because I do think that, and this has come up as a comment a number of times, I agree it's important. Field trips will be funded through the district budgeting process, because that's essentially what we do. And it just addresses, it gives some kind of answer, even though it's general, to that question that keeps coming up, is how are field trips funded?
I would just be cautious of that, because it's not always through the district. It may be the PTOs that may be funding it, or are helping hands. So I'd be cautious just to say that through the district.
Okay.
I know this is being brought forward to the Finance Committee
Right.
to have further discussion, and even possibly taking it to Ms. Deco in regards to the Citizens Advisory Council to talk about the funding of field trips as a topic.
I get concerned that we can go off on all sorts of tangentials there, like the transportation to the field trip. I mean, we can go on and on.
Right.
So I'd prefer just to keep it concise to this as it is.
All right. Julia, do you have comments, thoughts?
Thank you for removing that sentence. And my other comments I can share with you later.
Okay.
Okay. So I have a couple of things. One of them is to clarify, with regard to authority, I thought that in an indirect way, the board approves all trips. But maybe I know that it says further on that the superintendent approves field trips that do not require board approval, but in some senses, Mike, doesn't the board approve all field trips? You're not, yeah.
Well, the way that this is occurring is that the board's providing the superintendent with the ability to approve any field trips that aren't of significant magnitude, such as overnight or leaving the country. So if it's a trip to go down to the city for a museum, that's not something that.
Yeah. But, so this is this is the reason why I'm asking the question, that it says under authority, the board shall approve only those field trips that keep kids out of the district overnight. The fact of the matter is, indirectly, through our designation to the superintendent, we approve all field trips. So I'm concerned about that we approve only those field trips. And so I would be okay if it even said, the board shall directly approve only those field trips. It almost makes it sound like we are taking away from ourselves the authority to approve field trips that we designate to Ken to approve. That's what it basically says. Because it says we shall approve only those field trips that are planned to keep students out of the district overnight.
Right, those are the ones that come on the board agenda.
Well, I'm saying directly approved.
Directly approved, correct.
Indirectly, we approve everything because we designate Ken to approve the trips that don't come before the board.
So
Or take out the word only.
Yeah, I don't actually think that's an approval, though. I think that's just a designation of authority. I don't think we're approving those field trips. I think we're giving Ken the authority to approve them. I think there's
Okay.
a distinction.
All right, so that's what
my
I.
opinion.
No, that was what my question was about that. Okay, fine. Then,
But that's just my opinion.
no,
You
no,
have two
no.
other
Do we
members
have
of the
thoughts?
committee
I
down
mean,
there.
it was a clarification of my own about the language of it. The other question is, in between, so field trips are curricular, class trips are social, What are sports team trips? What are they?
They would be extracurricular, so we'd have to.
Do we have a different policy to cover extracurricular
I will,
trips?
I will check that. I'm sure there is something that goes along those lines, but I will definitely have to
It
look
makes me
into
wonder if it would be a 200 because it's not curricular, so it's not a 100.
Correct.
And maybe we just lump it into, and maybe it's all the same category as class trips and social trips because there are circumstances where we might not allow a student to go.
Now, when you refer to trips,
So the color guard team traveled to Ohio 2 or 3 years ago. The color guard team is not, it wasn't an academic trip, it was a team trip, it was an extracurricular. But it wasn't social, it was a competitive sport. When our teams go to, out to Pittsburgh overnight to compete in the state championship, pick a sport. I'm sure they do, right? They go away, they sometimes go on tournaments and might be gone for a day or two.
but you're not referring to every away game.
No, I am referring to trips that, a competitive trip that would take a child out of the district for an overnight event.
Like taking the baseball team to Florida for
Taking
spring
the baseball
training?
team. Well, but they wouldn't go for that. The color guard team went to Ohio to the World Championships 2 years ago.
baseball team did go
They
to
were,
Florida.
they were out of the state for 4 days on a district trip, so they got a district approval for the trip. It was not academic. I just want to find
I'll
out.
look into that because, and it's difficult just to add it because it's.
I don't think it
We're
should be
saying
added
field
to
trips are used
curricular.
right, because it's saying field trips here are used when teaching and learning are integral to the curriculum.
Why I
so,
don't think it's
yeah,
curricular.
Right.
What's the band trip?
That's a social, well, no, that might be extracurriculars.
Extracurricular, I would.
Well, actually, but band is curricular. The band field trip, they go and perform, they take band during the school day. That's maybe for the
It's-
superintendent to determine that one, but color guard is clearly an extracurricular activity, whereas band is a trip on which kids can be, or band's a class where kids get graded.
Except that when the color guard team goes with them, it gets very muddy.
Well, I'll let you guys figure that
Okay,
out. There's
we'll
kind of
look
a,
into
there's
that
a
one
little
now
bit of
for
a gray
sure.
area. That's one thing. The other question is actually coming up in conjunction with the comment Mrs. Sherry made. And Mike, I think in the wording in the 2 paragraphs where we're referencing policy 210 and 916, I think we should take out the number in case we ever change the number. So what I would suggest is that we say, all volunteers who accompany students are required to comply with all state and federal laws, as well as any existing policy and administrative regulations, and cross-reference policy 916 in the left-hand column. Don't reference it in the text of the policy. And the same with 210. All students who require medication are required to comply with all state and federal laws, as well as any existing policy and administrative regulations, period, and cross-reference 210 on the left-hand side. Okay. That way, if there's ever a change to those policies, the very housekeeping Mrs. Sherry referenced can be done without having to bring back this. And it, just a side, we should probably be mindful of wording policy that way to make it an easier issue to housekeep.
One other suggestion that I could make
Sure.
as well along those lines is when a policy is eliminated in the future, maybe as part of eliminating that policy, a search can be done for cross-references, and part of the same motion that eliminates the policy could say, we're going to either eliminate all these references or we're going to change them now to new policy number, whatever. So, for example, on 210.1, you could say, we're going to, all references and all policies to 210.1 shall now be to 210. And that can be part of the same motion that eliminates that policy so that it, that seamless cross-referencing takes place.
I would agree with you in terms of the vote. In terms of the actual work of it, it might be, I want to.
Well, right. Someone's going to actually have to go through them and
Correct.
Right. Look for all the cross-references.
Yeah, I want us to be smart about this piece of it. So that would be, if everybody agrees, I think that changing that wording slightly will just help make this a little bit easier. And the last question is just a terminology on the first paragraph of the second page, the last sentence. Such field trips shall be presented to the board. Is it for ratification of approval or just ratification? Mike? it's more a question for you.
Well, it would be ratification of approval because the superintendent has the authority to approve them,
Okay.
and it's presented to the board for ratification of his approval after the fact.
Okay, then if the rest of you agree, I'd like to change the last three words of that sentence to be, from "to be ratified" to change to "for ratification of approval."
Okay.
Can I go back to the question I had about the titles of those two policies?
Oh,
or
yeah, I
the-
wanted to follow up with that. Ask
Because
everybody what
if
we
this
think.
comes to the board for a first read in August, I will inevitably, if it hasn't been addressed, ask about that.
No, I
231.
wanted to, that was the last thing I wanted to ask everybody
okay.
is, those were my questions about those are my personal questions. So Amy's comment about making a distinction in the title, Dave, Julia, what do you think?
How about curriculum-related field trips?
I think a title change makes it the easiest.
Yes.
Curriculum or curriculum-based field trips, curriculum-related, whatever. Does that suffice for you,
Yeah.
Dave?
I mean, would you go so far as to make the other one non-curricular?
Well, I think when we review it,
Okay.
But
I mean,
I
is
wouldn't-
it simple to pull it and, sometimes I think it helps to do policies side by side, because if there are things that that are consequential to another policy, you can sort of park it and do it sometime when you review that policy, or if it's not so cumbersome, maybe pull it up at the same time.
I'm needing to bring that one forward anyways because of the changes with volunteers and medications in that one. as
and
well.
also we're going to clarify about sports-related
Correct, and the
teams. So I think
extracurricular.
that'll be the time to deal with the title change.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't want
If
to
I
do it in
remember.
2 steps. Well,
We'll note it. For
I think,
sure.
I think some of us will
Just an
remember.
extensive review.
So can we also put forth curriculum-related, curriculum-based field trips as the new title? Is that, I think that's certainly fine. All right, so we look forward to seeing the changes as we've discussed with, for a first read in August. Okay, great. You wanted to move on to 210?
Yes, so policy 210 is being brought forward for a second read.
I'm sorry, it's going to go to the board for a first reading in August. Correct. Yes, right, it'll go to the board. We can, assuming all the changes occur as we just discussed.
Correct.
It will be for first read at the August board meeting.
Correct.
Great. Okay, Ken, did you have any comments about it? I'm sorry, I should have asked. All right, let's move on to 210.
So policy 210, use of medications. This is the, being brought back for a second reading. And this will incorporate, as noted last month, policy 210.1, possession/use of asthma inhalers, epinephrine, auto-injectors, and it adds Narcan authorization language, as well as the diabetic management language. So because policy 210.1 is incorporated into this policy, it'll be repealed. And the policy is being brought forward, as I said, for hopefully with a second read and adoption at our August regular business meeting.
Wait, is it a first read in August or a second read in August?
This will be a second read in August. It was approved at the first read at the June meeting.
Okay.
So in relationship to policy 210, if you look on page 2 of 2, there was some new language added in regards to the delegation of responsibility. This is specific to the certified school nurse or other licensed personnel, such as a registered nurse or a licensed practical nurse, to administer medication to students. This was to help clarify that piece. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Dave.
so on that language, I'm not comfortable with the use of must administer medication to students. So I think in my opinion, it should read more along the lines of shall be the only district personnel or district representative permitted to administer medication to students.
Yes.
Can I make it better?
Please.
Didn't mean to say better. I meant to say a
No,
different
make it
idea.
better, yeah.
I meant to
Make it-
say only responsible personnel, because that's a term that's used in here.
Correct.
May administer.
Yeah, that was going to be my overriding comment, is that we have defined responsible personnel in the beginning of the policy. So I think that to the extent that we can use that terminology, it's
Okay.
right above it, rather than saying just responsible personnel may administer medication to students. Only responsible personnel, but capitalize responsible personnel.
Yes.
Like that. Yeah, great.
Okay. And because of adding the delegation of responsibility, obviously guidelines turns into number 5. On the page 3 of 4, this is if a student's parent guardian provides prior written consent for the designated form non-prescription pain relief. This was that addressing the piece about Tums and aspirin.
Tylenol.
At Tylenol at the beginning of the school year when you sign off the emergency card, that this language now covers that component of it.
Tony, where's that? I'm just,
It's on page 3 of 4, the second paragraph.
oh, right.
And that was also incorporated into the AR as well.
But again, my question for that is, can that also only be administered by responsible personnel?
Yes, so that language needs to be added as well then.
Maybe
still
administered
needs to
by,
be-
so I would just say maybe administered by responsible personnel, capitalized. Boy, the days of going to the secretary for a Tylenol, are they long gone? You were going to clarify, or I asked you if you could clarify the reason that we are still specifically using the brand name Narcan in the policy. Do you have any insight into that?
Yes.
Or maybe Mike does, between the two of you.
Ed did. Do you remember
Yeah,
what
I did.
you
I
had?
spoke
I think
up
you were the one that
about it,
gave the
Can
information.
you mic yourself?
The generic is this the naloxone. Is that, I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Naloxone.
Yeah, that's the generic. The Narcan is specifically referenced dealing with the inhalant in the law that was passed. So that's why it's referencing both here.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry, so are you saying that, so here's my issue, they have another spray coming out with a different brand name, and it's like supposed to be really, anyone can use it. It's like nasal spray for dummies.
I do have a response for you on that, Julia.
Okay, thank you.
Narcan is the one that will be provided to the schools through the county.
This is my thing, though. What if that changes next year? And I appreciate we can go back and change the
Right.
policy, but it just because this is my field with pharma.
Right.
So I'm sensitive. I
Understood.
just don't understand the point of doing that, unless you have a really good reason. But it just seems to me that sticking in generic would get the job done.
Could we simply say, to Julia's point, Narcan or such other medication as is provided to the district by the county?
Yeah, I mean, you could reference it more generically like that, certainly. I mean, the way it's currently set up is that it will be the Narcan, at least for the time being. Now, I don't know if the new drug, when it comes online, whether they'll start offering or providing that to schools as well, but I mean, you could certainly reference it more generically or more inclusively.
Amy, did you?
Is that okay with the
I
stating it
think
with
that-
Narcan or other?
I think Dave's
Provide.
wording addresses Julia's concern.
Okay.
So I'm good with that.
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Amy, did you have questions about this policy?
Yes, I do. The original version of the policy had a line in it under the guidelines that said, quote, "The district shall inform all parents, guardians, students, and staff about the policy and procedures governing the administration of medication." I don't see that, again, maybe I missed it, but I don't see that in the current
Oh, I did read
draft.
that. Wait a second. I feel like I read that. I remember that, and I feel like I read it, so let me
I
look.
thought it was in another place. That's why I'm looking too.
All right, well, was that your only thing as we look through here, Julia? I mean, Amy, sorry.
No, but that was important because, like any policy we do, and I would make the same comment about field trips, is that parents being informed either through handbooks or that being very consistent with how we do our handbooks, and I know that the handbooks are being significantly redone, from what I understand.
Yes.
Do they get approved in August or at the
They will.
August
They'll go in
meeting?
front of the curriculum, in front of the curriculum committee in August.
And then don't they have to go to the full board
They
too?
will.
And would that be the August board meeting where we're gonna need to approve
I am
those?
hoping. You know what? I need to check on the meeting dates. I don't have curriculum.
It'll
Yeah, I
be
did.
before the-
But it'll be before the August meeting.
Okay. So that line to me is very important because medication is such an important thing, and this says that parents are going to be notified. It doesn't say, well, parents will fill out a card or this. It says the parents will be notified about the policy and procedures governing the administration of medication. And I think that that's an important statement to include in this policy. Again, I'm not sure why it was taken out.
Yeah, I thought that I had seen that wording in, it wasn't that directive. I thought I had seen it in new wording, but you're right, I don't see it.
I'll go back and check that, though.
Okay.
Okay, so if you were to add it back in, would that be something under purpose, authority, definition, or I guess it would go back to guidelines, right? Because that's where it was before?
I would imagine it would go to guidelines.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to suggest is when it comes to page 3 of the policy, there are special procedures out of the ordinary, ones for asthma inhalers, ones for the how do you pronounce it? Naloxone administration, and one is special self-management of diabetes. What I was going to suggest is maybe because 2 of them have to do with self-administration and the other one doesn't, is putting the self-administration regarding the asthma and the diabetes together and putting the Narcan separately, because that's not self-administered, is it?
No.
No.
I mean, if you need it, you probably aren't in
Right,
a
you're-
position to give it to yourself.
Correct.
So just for flow, I wanted to propose the idea of lumping the ones that deal with self-administration together and putting the naloxone separately. And the first aid is in there near the special procedures, which I thought was just an odd place for it. So just structurally, those are my comments in that regard.
Okay.
And student consent actually is another special procedure, to be honest with you, because that gives the student who's 18 the opportunity to self-administer medication. So that's another one that I thought, if they're all identified the same, put in the same place, that's like the exception part of the policy.
So the student consent, Mike, maybe I'm wrong here. I don't think that that's necessarily just about self-administration. That is saying that students are 18 or older can bring in their own medication, even if it's to be administered by the nurse. They don't necessarily have, they can basically take over the role of the parent if they discuss that possibility with the, with the principal and who's the other people that are the guidance council, whatnot. So it's not just about self-administration. And I'm presuming they would still have to follow the same guidelines of bringing in the form and the doctor's note and all
Yes,
of that.
we
It's
had
just
that
that they can
discussion.
do it instead
Correct.
of, there's the opportunity when kids are 18 to do that for themselves.
Correct. They still have to bring it in the prescribed bottle
Yeah,
with the note
exactly.
and everything.
I think that, yes, right.
Well, and I was looking at the high school handbook, and again, when you update the handbooks, this might be something to look at, that it says specifically in the high school handbook in bold language, students may not carry medication. There's no, except under certain circumstances as per policy 210 or something like that. If a student's walking around with, say, Ritalin or Zoloft,
It's not allowed. The only medication you're allowed to carry around is the diabetes medication and an asthma inhaler.
It still has to go to the nurse's office. It has to follow all the same protocols. They just have to go to the nurse's office to take the medication. Because it still has to be secured and everything else.
okay, so it's just that they don't need the parent-guardian
Cor-
piece.
correct.
That's what student
Pretty
consent
much what it
boils
comes
down
to.
to.
Yes.
Okay. Well, again, just with the handbook, it's so important that this stuff is consistent. Because when I looked through for field trips and when I looked through for medication, no matter what division it was, very few of them reference policy, and if they did, the language that was excerpted from the policy was so different, so inconsistent from handbook to handbook. So however it's going to be in the handbook, if the policy applies across the district, in my opinion, the language in the handbooks should be the same.
And that's directly the reason for revamping the handbooks this year, because of the inconsistency that has come with the over year after year after year, people having their hands on it and changing the language. We want to make sure it does.
So-
It is consistent.
Yeah, I want to be mindful of
mind-
making our way through, but
Sure.
I guess what I would say to this, Ken, note to self, you know for sure there's 3 board members who are going to be approving handbooks. I'll lump Dave in there, but I know the 3 of us who really, really, really care that this kind of stuff is consistent and well communicated. So feel free to share with your building principals and directors, right? Okay, good.
There's one other thing. There is a word that I think is wrong in 4 on page 2, where it says the tense of the word or something. The superintendent
yes.
or his or her designee in consultation with school.
Outlined below.
Outlined.
Yes.
With a D instead of S.
Yep.
Thank you.
Number 5 of that same section,
Yes.
Dave chime in, but I think it should probably say record-keeping obligations of district personnel for medication stored on district property, and, that should be added, and dispensed by district responsible personnel in accordance with this policy. Because we cannot be responsible for, all the medication in the world.
Okay.
I think also as a general rule, you'll probably want to go through here and take a look for where you reference like a specific nurse or somebody, and that term should be replaced with responsible personnel.
Okay.
It happens a couple of times in the paragraph after at the beginning, except when self-administration is specifically authorized. It happens as you get later in the first aid policy or first aid section. So just a general read-through, I think, would help there. And then also after superintendent, where you see that, it should say, instead of "and designee," this is in both policies, you want to say his or her. Sometimes we'll read superintendent or designee, and then sometimes we'll say
Or his or her.
superintendent.
I
yeah.
gotcha.
Right?
Be consistent with it. Yep.
I think given the number of things that we changed to this, and given that it's not going to go for a second read until after the handbooks have to be approved anyway, so I think the wording of the handbooks was going to be kind of subject to, whatever we ultimately approve at the August meeting. I'd like to bring this back again for another first read
Okay.
in August.
For a
and-
first read.
Oh, okay. All right, Julius has some more stuff. Then that even underscores it more. And then we'll do a second read in September. Either way, the handbooks were going to have to be kind of done with some wording that acknowledged that this particular policy was still in the approval process.
Okay.
All right, Julia had some more.
Can I just ask a quick question about
Sure.
that? Because it was approved it went through for a first read already.
But then you changed it.
Okay, then
And
the
we,
changes.
we,
got-
I mean,
okay.
that's a pretty big
I'm sorry, I just
paragraph.
wanted to clarify so
Yeah,
I
no,
understand.
it has to do with the amount that has changed since the
in it.
first read.
Okay.
Does the 504 plan ever include medication administered at school?
Generally, I'm going to speak for a principal's point of view. It's generally, there's a personal health care plan that would fall for the medications.
Okay.
It may be referenced in a 504, but there's the personal health care plan for medications to be delivered.
So and this might be covered, but when I look at purpose number 2, does that include, because I saw individualized education plan, but I was wondering if you didn't have an IEP, but you were.
That would be referencing the 504 IEPs, personal
that's an
health plans.
That is still an IEP?
The student's
504
individualized education plan.
A student's accommodation plan would be a 504.
Okay, so that's covered in that first part of the sentence, the first paragraph.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, all right. This last sentence, under authority,
Okay.
where it says, "Those guidelines, as amended from time to time, are interpreted consistent with this policy and incorporated herein and made a part thereof." That could be a little less lawyery. And just because I know we talk about policies being for the people who need to read them, that confounds me.
I'll work with Mike on
Thank
reading.
you. Let's see, as we discussed before, if you could just replace school nurse with responsible personnel. So I understand this. the Narcan, excuse me, naloxone, can only be administered by someone who's trained to use it in our district, correct?
That was my understanding, they had to be trained.
So let's say there's a school dance, and there's no nurse. There's not normally a nurse at the school dance, right?
No, generally
So
not,
we
no.
would not even like be covered by a Good Sam law
So
to
that's what I was
administer
gonna,
ourselves?
you know what, Mike, I'll refer that question to you, because is this just like life-threatening experience, so like epinephrine? Is it the same type of situation?
That I'm not actually entirely sure whether the Narcan would be covered under that type of a Good Samaritan law or not, because they did put forward pretty specific recommendations and language about how and the circumstance under which it's to be used. So I don't know whether that would be covered. I would assume that it would, because it falls under the same rationale, but a lot of times these things aren't, driven by rationale. So I'd have to take a look at that and see whether if somebody just grabbed it and did it on an emergency basis, whether they would be covered and protected.
Which brings me to a question when you're done. Are you done?
But on the same point, so as a school, do we want a policy so that whoever is on duty administratively in the building at when the nurse is not there knows where it's located? New territory for us all, but I would think.
So I think the law says only responsible personnel can be trained in it, and that has to be a school nurse or a licensed, a licensed health personnel, an LPN.
Can I
or
get
something.
clarification for you that and get back to you, though? I want, because
For us to,
no, but I'm just thinking about it myself, and I want to make sure that we're following.
and I get that
What the
it's
county
laws are
says as
laws, and
well.
there's just so much we can do. It's just
Yeah.
that, wow, what a shame.
So I think the difference is between if there's a Good Samaritan law, then it would be helpful if the district person, if the building principals at least knew where it was, if they're covered under the Good Samaritan law. If they're not covered under the Good Samaritan law, they're probably best to just not, sadly, but, you call 911 and
Right.
that's what you do. If it can truly only be the responsible personnel who can be trained in it,
Yeah.
but other district personnel are allowed to know the location and would be covered under Good Samaritan, but you probably would need to look into that. Was that?
I'm thinking epinephrine,
you're okay,
AED,
so then,
Those
yeah,
type of things.
back to the comment about the law right now. So on page 3 of 4, under special procedures, which, by the way, I agreed with Amy, that where it's self-administration, let's title it that way, and special procedures. But the second sentence, the district physician pursuant to Act 139 of 2014, I think probably what makes sense there is to say something about the district physician, from existing, authorized by state law, and cross-reference 139 out here so that if the law changes,
Okay.
and it does provide for some changes as time goes by, won't be constrained by the Act 130. I know that's the existing law, but if we move it out to the reference column.
Okay.
All right, so we'll see that back again as another first read, and I appreciate it. And we'll keep moving on that. Next item is 9:15, the conversation.
Yeah, this is truly just a conversation, brought back, as you can see, this was based off of comments from our revisions off our May meeting when it was brought back. We just brought it, we brought it down to size here to basically say that the superintendent has the authority to make the decision of whether or not a school-related organization of parent and district personnel would be part of what's going on, so, in the district. So questions, comments, I mean, this is a rough draft, I have to say, because I just took it down from what the conversation was.
Well, I think, we probably ought to talk about what we are looking for the purpose to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then, beyond that, I think this is largely as broad as we were hoping to keep it, and then let the superintendent ultimately make the decision that he feels is best for the district. Speaking of that, though, under delegation of responsibility to follow up on Dave, it should be the superintendent.
His or her.
Or his or her designee.
We'll get that
So,
consistent, just like the
No, no, no,
district
I know
and
that.
policy, we got this.
On the second page, let's, waived, number 4, waived as per as per school board policy, and cross-reference 707
In
on
the
the side.
side.
And I think, I am pretty sure that is the correct policy.
Yes, that
Right,
707 is the
no,
correct
no,
policy.
that's pretty good. You know, Ken, when you read the way the wording of the purpose is, and when you've given thought to, you know, what we asked you to give some thought to, you know, when we all spoke about this in May, what do you feel we asked this question last week, you know, what is the, how did I say it? Like, what benefit is there to us to have a policy? So what benefit would there be for you to have this policy?
Well, I guess it brings up the initial question of what is it we're trying to solve with this policy?
I mean, I do think, I guess
Your
my
mic's not
understanding-
on, Susan. I don't-
Sorry. I guess I'll speak for myself and let everybody else. I think it was ultimately to try to find a balance that we can be supportive of organizations that, you know, have a vested interest in the district without, you know, to be able to give you the opportunity to find the balance of, you know, what's the right balance between district resources that they need to be of service to and of benefit to the district without either side feeling over-constrained or overburdened.
It seems we have had a history of different groups that have been developed, and then as those groups have developed, they may have, you know, a board representative with that group, or the groups might have some type of advertising. So I can see the need for some consistency, but I think really the meat of this is going to be a discussion among the board about how do we want to set up you know, different board members' representation with different groups. What is that threshold that we want to put in place that says this particular group has a board member representative or just has an administrative liaison to the group or has no liaison to the group. So I think we can, using this, we can do that. I think that has been what I understand has been the concern is that it's a concern of resources and it's a concern of equity. Is that?
I would agree, but I don't want to, yeah.
I would strongly agree.
So, and I think that we, you know, we also had a discussion, you know, at the last, you know, facilities meeting that there needs to be some more understanding too of how what is the equitable manner in which we, you know, use our facilities and which groups use our facilities and what are the differences between these different groups. There can be at times special arrangements, but let's be clear why there's a special arrangement. What is the rationale behind that? So I think that's a piece of this as well. So I think this does give us that opportunity to try to set something up that we could then create some type of standards where I could meet with board leadership and say, okay, what time of year do we want to set up to say that each year the board will look at and decide which groups, you know, have a board liaison and what type of process do we want to create? Do we want to rotate those liaisons? I think we want to be, you know, be very mindful of, you know, how we do delegate that, you know, both the administrative support to groups and also the board support. I think we do want to be mindful of that.
Well,
You're good.
yeah, let me see how you guys think about this. For the purpose, because really, other than the purpose, I was pretty much fine with this. Official board recognition of an organization of parents and district personnel as a school-related organization. So I don't necessarily know that all these school-related organizations have district personnel, so we should probably talk about that. But official board recognition of a school-related organization acknowledges that organization's ability to be a productive contributor to the district's mission. So it's not that official board recognition enhances the organization's ability to be productive. There are groups that won't necessarily have our official recognition, and they could still be very productive and supportive to the district's mission. but I think that giving a group this level acknowledges that that group could be, a productive contributor.
I had inserted the word mission as well.
Oh, yeah, to be a productive contributor to the district's mission, capital M, because whatever it is they're trying to achieve, there would be no reason to have a group working with us unless in some fashion we could say, how is this group enhancing and assisting, the superintendent and the district in the mission? So that was the only word I could come up with, but I don't know what other people think about the wording.
Well, there was a purpose in the other version that was changed, and I don't necessarily think it was wrong to replace it, but I'm just curious what the thinking was behind replacing it.
What was the original one?
It said, "The Board of School Directors believes that the education of children is a responsibility shared with parents to ensure that the best interests of the child are served in the educational process. Official board recognition of an organization of parents and district personnel as a school-related organization greatly enhances that organization's ability to access district facilities, distribute the organization's information through district channels, and have liaison with the board and the administration. Therefore, at the board at its
Okay.
discretion, blah, blah, blah," went into that.
I like the first paragraph, but I think the reason that the second paragraph was changed is that in that second paragraph, as they talk about district support and a liaison and website, it's basically obliging you in the purpose, and I don't think that that's an appropriate place for outlining what an organization may or may not receive with regard to district support. I think that that's probably why the second part of that sentence changed. I could imagine that's the reason. I don't mind the first part of that paragraph, but I think that that's
It's
probably
a nice opening sentence. "The Board of School Directors believes that the education of children is a responsibility shared with parents to ensure that the best interests of the child are served in the educational process." So maybe that one, you want to
Yeah, I
do
don't
it
mind
like
that.
a
I don't mind that
soft,
sentence. I think that's a nice
supportive
segue.
opening, and then go into something.
Right, but I wouldn't, personally, I wouldn't want to list those
No,
things.
I'm not suggesting
Yeah.
you do. I'm saying that first sentence. It's sort of a global statement about the value
Sure.
of parents.
Just the first sentence? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Julie, do you have a thought?
I'm okay with that. I had my own words, but I'm okay
Well,
with
let's
the
hear
other
it.
one. I don't know if it's any better. But I said, for the ... greatly enhances that organization's ability to be a productive contributor to the district and reinforce the parent-district partnership for the well-being of students. I'm okay with going with either. I don't really care. I'm not dying on this one.
All right, well, why don't we do this, since it's only a discussion, why don't we send you
Some ideas.
some of these things and kind of, see what you, as a group of district, this is really a policy that I really think, for myself personally, I really want this to be a policy that's actually going to serve your Building 10. So if you guys take a couple of these things and mull it over and give us some thoughts on what you think is the best, I don't feel the need to wordsmith it. I just,
Okay.
Want to make sure that it speaks accurately to what we actually are trying to achieve. So why don't you two both send them to them?
Fine. And I have a question about number 4. And I was thinking about PTO events and how they have social events and fundraisers. And I saw about this reference to whether the events are related to the district's educational programs. Are social events and fundraisers directly related to the educational programs? Or do you want to take that out?
Well, maybe they mean if you're raising money to support,
or
like,
considered
the schools functioning,
Be
that's,
considered
Okay, but what if it's the 8th grade party
related to the
and it's sponsored by the PTO?
district's mission. See, I think we should say district's mission, because, growing the social and emotional part of the kids
that's a good one.
is, whether or not it's true curriculum. We think educational and we think,
Could you
is
say
it
district
curriculum?
programs? Just to get,
Sure, because the social aspect of the kids is part of the program that you provide.
And we actually had that in one version,
Yeah.
in the first paragraph under the purpose, where you've added the word mission. It was the district's programs.
Okay.
on one version. So either mission or programs.
Oh, good.
Okay, good. All righty.
I just wanted to say that I think that it's a great stab. I know that it seemed like you had to boil a whole bunch of stuff and history down into one draft, and I think you did a good job of doing that, and it looks, with a little bit of wordsmithing here and there, I think it's a great, almost ready policy, and the bulk of it falls in the ARs, I guess.
Yes.
Ken, before we start our discussion, I want to interject with a quick question of Ken so that we're just mindful of the time. Reusing policy numbers. I'd like you to give some thought to when we end up rescinding a policy at some point, and then we ultimately reuse that number for some other policy. It came up in something that Mrs. Sherry said, but it actually came up to my attention last week in a completely different conversation, because we have reused the number, policy 903. It used to be the public comment policy, and it has been reused as now the new communications policy. And I'm concerned about the confusion. Mrs. Sherry referenced it even with number 004. 004 used to be about removing a board member, and now it's a policy about new board orientation. So it's kind of a segue into this conversation when I say to you, what's the policy on reusing policy numbers? What's the practice? What's the best way to approach it? I'm laughing because this is like, what's the best way for us to be clear about the reuse of a number in those instances?
Well, I think the first step is you got to make sure to eliminate the old references from the existing policies, because then once you do that, then you eliminate part of the confusion right there.
Okay.
And then the second issue is that if you've just recently eliminated a policy, it's usually best to wait a little bit before
I think this is an oversight,
you
so-
replace the
Yeah.
policy with another number. But there's really nothing that prohibits you from immediately eliminating a policy and then making a new one using the same number that's completely different. There's no reason why you're not allowed to, but to eliminate confusion, it's usually best to let it sit for a while before you go back to fill, and just keep the numbers going upward, and before you go back and then start filling in the empty holes
Okay.
to give it a little bit of time.
I do think that probably we ought to talk about a way to memorialize in the table of contents when we've rescinded a policy. If you were to look at 903 on the website right now, you'd have no knowledge that just a short while ago it was a different policy. And I think that can probably create some confusion. So, Tony, we can talk about that offline, about if there's an efficient way to just memorialize in the table of contents somewhere that is the case. I think, it might help. So, anyway, thank you.
Just a quick comment on that. Just when you go through board docs and you're looking at other districts, some of them do have previously policy blah 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 as
Okay.
the new. So I don't know if that's a way to do it, but I'm just saying there are ideas. There's ways of memorializing that for sure.
Okay. All righty, great. So let's move on to agenda item number 4, the
Sure.
long-awaited discussion.
So this is a discussion about policy versus best practices, and just to engage in conversation and what's the most effective way to develop policy and administrative regulations versus acknowledging the best practices and/or procedures to be implemented by the district in its daily operations. And I
Okay.
want to make sure, Amy, did you get the same material? Did you get this PSBA? This was just information regarding policy and the development of it.
Oh, did we get that?
No.
I don't, did any of us get that?
Yes, I gave it at our
Oh.
planning meeting.
You give us a planning meeting.
Do you need?
I'm so sorry.
I
That's
didn't,
okay.
yeah, you know what? I didn't think to throw that in here.
No, I
But
didn't.
just talk, I'll listen. Yeah.
Okay, I'm actually have to use yours.
Huh?
I
Wait,
gave
you know,
my
we'll-
name.
We'll share.
I'm next, well, you know
That's
what,
fine,
he's
that's fine.
gonna-
I'm going to
well,
scoot over, and if I need to go.
I'll share with
take a
Amy.
quick look.
Yeah, that's some of it.
So basically, when you look at Pennsylvania School Board Association, and this is just a reference, this is not the lay of the law and what should,
Oh, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Tony, is this available?
this I did not make copies of. I
Okay,
apologize.
it is,
We can make it.
yeah, we'll,
Can
we'll,
make it, we will.
it's nothing, it's just PSBA, I think it's just a.
It was just
I
to set the
apologize. No, it's
discussion,
not.
yeah, it wasn't, any intention of not providing it. It just
Right, we'll make it available. Great. That would be really great. I appreciate it, Jackie.
Can you take the one that I gave to Ms. Goldman and copy that one, please?
All right, so let's keep talking, and we're going to get you some copies, Judy.
So basically what it does, just outlines what a policy should be. In regards to, if you look at our policies, we do fit a lot of this because we have a lot of the Boilermaker policies that came from PSBA in 2008 as well. But it's basically setting a purpose, recognizing your limitations along with mandates and resources, providing a direct action of what should be done, how much, and sometimes why, assigning responsibility, such as who is accountable to whom, and information to staff and community, noting that time when parents should be aware that a policy has been in place and how it's going to affect their child during the school year. And then providing systems for monitoring and reporting the implementation, evaluating, reviewing reports, and revising as necessary. The document then goes on just to really give an outline of how the policy is to be written, and we kind of do this in this aspect already. We've gotten away from a little bit of the Boilermaker type of policies that came from PSBA, only because we want it specific to our organization and how it's going to affect the organization and operations of it. There's simple language to ask, questions to ask. Is the language simple, clear, and understandable? Is the language concise? Does the policy communicate the expectations to the board? Does the policy inform the public of the board's intent? Does the policy delegate responsibility to the correct person? Will the policy accomplish its purpose? Will there be any problem implementing the policy? And do you need to consult with anyone, such as a solicitor? Is the policy flexible to meet all occasions? And what is actually done in the district? We want to avoid legal terms, educational jargon, confusing sentence structure, long paragraphs, and minutia. So those are kind of the high site of what we're looking at when developing policy.
These are the other pages.
This is the one I was looking for, actually.
Sorry.
That's all right. The policy, what it is and what it is not, because I think this is going to be the lead into our conversation. It says that a policy is related to the general area. It's a broad statement that allows discretion in execution of the applicable over long periods of time. It can be communicated to everyone. It's equivalent to legislation and referencing legislation related to the question to do what. And I think that kind of question came up before. What does the policy actually do? What it is not, it's not related to specific issue or problems. It's not a precise statement with specific details. It's mechanics to implement policy. It's not communicated mainly to employees, but rather all stakeholders. It is not parameters for action, and it is not related to the question how to do. So I think that's one of the main conversation pieces here is what to do versus how to do. And that operations versus how is it going to drive our organization in what we do. So at that, I want to open it up and any discussion, and I'll take some notes for sure. And I know Patty's going to take them as well, but just to capture and be able to get any questions answered as we move forward.
Julie?
So I'm thinking about this what to do versus how to do, and can anyone think of a really good example?
Well, I think that what to do and how to do is really the difference between a policy and administrative regulation. We're going to have a policy about procedures for going on field trips. All the details of how field trips are going to shake out and all the steps that are going to have to be taken, how that's going to happen, belongs in administrative regulation. The policy about medication, there's law we have to follow. Thank you.
Jackie, may I have a stapled one?
There's law we have to follow. There's procedures we have to follow that need to be followed, and we're going to say in a policy, procedures have to be followed. What exactly those procedures are in implementation is AR. But I think the question that Julia's been trying to say is, what's the way to determine whether or not something should be a best practice or a policy,
One of the examples that was, I mean, I just
the hard part.
kind of Googled it and looked for some examples that kept coming up as kind of over and over was the budget process. The budget, there's a very specific policy of how the budget has to be developed. But in regards to what you put in your budget is going to be a local decision. There's procedures. It doesn't tell you exactly and wasn't precise to you must order eSchool as your school housing software, but rather you're using some type of system to organize your student information.
Right. We just had this, was the conversation when we were talking about the transportation policy and the bus
The
stops.
bus stops, that was a good one too.
So, you know, transportation, we have a policy that we have to provide transportation. And we might have an AR about bus stops, but I would wonder, so the question that's come up for me is when we're making the decision of whether or not to develop policy, the question that comes up for me is what benefit to the district is there? You know, and cost benefit. So we have to have a policy about transportation. We're required by law to provide transportation. I don't know that I necessarily think that there's benefit to developing a policy about bus stops. You know, if we have within our transportation policy, we make reference to the fact that we will develop bus stops, unless there's specific law about bus stops, as an example, that we have to do. I'm not sure that I think that there is a benefit to having a particular policy. To the extent that policies constrain a district,
As compared to having procedures in
as
place.
as compared to having procedures that allow the district to run smoothly and with, you know, a certain expectation of efficiency, great. But to the extent that policies will constrain the district, and Mike, jump in if you think that what I'm saying is
Can I jump in?
off base here. Yeah.
I think it's hard to judge something like a bus stop policy and its value, especially since it was recommended to us as an idea of in some districts there is a bus stop policy, but we haven't seen what that policy looks like. And I think if you first look at the policy and see if it has relevance to your district, I mean, hypothetically speaking, how would you know what value a bus stop policy could be? Now, I'm not necessarily advocating for a bus stop policy. I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate to say, doesn't it help to see why some other districts do have a bus stop policy by looking at the policy before you decide whether or not it's worth it to have one?
Well, Julia, jump in, but I think that the question I'm asking before that, for me, is just a higher level policies constrain. Policies constrain districts. They constrain students. You know, when we have a dress code policy, we constrain our students.
Can I just say, I think constrain is, I would see it as protect. You know, policies protect. They empower. I don't think it's just about constraining. I mean, we have close to 300 policies on the books that help our district function in a way that at the end of the day protects people. So I think there can be a constraining aspect to it, but I think policies are in place for things that actually are helpful.
I'm not saying that, so you're taking the word constrain as in a negative connotation, and I'm not.
Okay.
I would actually make the argument that by not having a bus stop policy that constrains us, we might actually be able to do something that would be even more helpful to students and parents. So I can appreciate that you might be taking the word constrain in a negative connotation. It's negative in the sense that it might prevent us from doing something we don't want to do, but it might also prevent us from doing something that would be good. So, you know, you say protect, and people could look at protect as protecting us from doing something that might be a good thing to be doing. So it depends on, I think that we have policies that do a good job of protecting, because I think that, you know, in all honesty, I think we as a committee work pretty hard to really try to think of a lot of different aspects of the impact of the policies. And that's where the good part of protection comes from. but it's a step further than that, and I think that's where you wanted to go with what would cause you to even consider doing a policy.
Right, because, and I take your point, constrain can be a very good thing. So, yes, but they all do constrain, no doubt about it, for better or for worse.
Right.
And that's the question. Where's the better, where's the worse? Do we write 100 policies a month, or do we write 0 policies a month? I think the answer is no to both. Where in between do we fall, and how do we get there is the real issue that I'm having. To my example that I brought up with hand washing. Every kid should wash their hands before lunch, and we should encourage it. Should we make a policy about it? I don't really think so. But how do you know? And that's the guidance that I think we should seek. Otherwise, this could be Tony's full-time job, writing policy for us.
So Mike, to Julia's point, because I think hand washing is actually a really good one. What would be the filter that you would use as a lawyer that would have you say, write a policy on handwriting, don't write a policy on handwriting? Hand washing, I'm sorry, handwriting, hand washing.
There's
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah. Well, I don't know about that, Mr. Bachelor.
Yeah, right.
Well, there's 2 filters. One is, obviously, there's some policies that you're required to have, just because
That's
the law
automatic,
says
right.
you have to have a policy.
Sure.
So that's the first one, and that one you really don't have any discretion on. Then the second one is it something that is broad enough of an impact that is significant enough that requires the board's direction as far as how something is to be accomplished? Because that's what the policies are. That's the direction of the board as to how the district in general should be run, with the details filled in by the administrative regulations and procedures. So is it something that rises to the level that requires the board's direction as to something being done? So the issue with hand washing, is it really necessary for the board to direct that, students should be told that they should wash their hands before lunch? And then you can look at that and say, well, probably not, because we employ competent staff, and we trust that, that's why we employ competent staff, and that's what they're supposed to be doing, just like they're supposed to be telling kids not to run in the hall, and they're supposed to be doing all these other things that we don't really need to start getting into those types of directives. However, there are other areas where you might say that, well, with the area with medication, there are some things that are required by law, there are some things aren't, but, is that an area where the board wants to provide some direction as to how things should be done, some general direction? You might say, yeah. So that's kind of the test that I always use is this an area of importance enough that it requires the boards basically to step in and direct how things should be done?
Okay, so Amy, let me ask you, Ken, jump in, please. No, go ahead.
Just going to jump in, and I think part of the things that I think we need to do as a district moving forward, and something that Tony's looking at doing between now and September, is identifying what are those areas that we have policies that we've already adopted the policy but don't have the AR maybe completed, and we've had some discussions about that. What are the things that we want to map out? Not to have them all solved by September, but at least have that thorough list of, in the fall, we could sit down and talk about what are those areas where we have unfinished work? What are those areas where we have cross-referencing maybe that we want to clean up? I'm excited to learn tonight that we actually do drop policies. That's actually good. I was worried that we just add and add and add. So I was excited to hear that we have some policies that are no longer on the books, that we do adjust and drop some as we move on as well. But I think that in moving forward, in identifying that list of, that where are we now and what do we want to do as we move forward to get to make sure we have all our policies in the place we want and all the ARs, and we identify where those areas we have to add the ARs. Using things like this, having discussions like this, using guidance from PSBA, the guidance from Mike, that, as we look at each policy, what is it we're trying to solve? What is that perceived need? And I think to ask ourselves those questions as those things come up. I think many of the policies that are going to bring forward, I would assume, are going to probably come from the administration often, saying, either it's a state, change, or we just had a few of those, but there will be other areas where the administration will be coming forward and saying, okay, we've encountered this, as we've encountered this, we need to adjust the policy as we encounter this, or we've changed a program and this has an implication, and this change of program will have an implication on our policies. Here's where we have to adjust our policy to reflect now this change of program. So I think this is a good discussion to have that could help us be a bit of this filter for how far do we go with each policy as we look at them.
So, Amy, let me ask you a question. Let's take Julia's hand washing suggestion. And if you were to take the position that we really needed to have a policy on hand washing, what are the types of things that you would say to convince us of the value of it? Like when you think about that. Do you hear what I'm saying? Do you understand what I'm saying?
On the agenda for the meeting tonight, it was written that the conversation was, the agenda item was titled Policy versus Best Practices. Mm-hmm. And so my thinking about that was that really there is no conflict or versus when it comes to best practices or policies, because in my opinion, as much as possible, policy should memorialize best practices unless there are some clear contraindicating reasons not to do that. And given that we have close to 300 policies on the books, it's clear that policy plays a really big role in how we operate as a district. So I took a look at district governance sources like the Iowa Lighthouse Project and the Pennsylvania and National School Boards Association's sources on policy and the Center for Public Education. And everywhere you look, making policy is one of the primary and most critical functions of a board. In fact, the National School Board Association just published a book, a guide, Key Work of School Boards, and they said, quote, policy permeates and dominates all aspects of school operations. It also presents the most powerful lever for the exercise of leadership. So, in my opinion, there's no versus. If there is something that we believe strongly is a best practice, then unless it doesn't meet certain criteria,
but what's that criteria? So that's the devil of the question, because we could create 400 policies. We could be sitting here in 2 years and saying we have 400 policies.
So I get that, but I'm kind of wondering where the real crux of this question is coming from, because I've only been on the policy committee for a little shy of 2 years, but I've watched policy as a member of the public for a long time, and I don't see this abundance of new policy making that isn't driven by state mandates that indicates to me why this is even an issue. For example, the communications policy that's new this year is actually replacing 3 policies. So you're going to be down 2 by the time that, the policy's been approved. So when we rescind in August, we'll be down 2. So a lot of times introducing a new policy consolidates work that you have on the books because you're updating things.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So I just think that, there must be something else that's going on here in terms of this discussion that maybe I wasn't privy to. Maybe it took place in June or in private conversations, but my sense is this conversation has come up because there's some problem with us writing policies. Is that the case? I mean,
I'll answer for me. There's no secret meeting, there's no secret agenda, there's nothing. And in fact, I think we were sitting right here at this table, and I think you were here when we were talking about it. And we were talking about when you need a policy and how much detail you need, and I think it was with the orientation. And we were looking at the orientation policy and all the detail in it and how it was sort of like a table of context. And that's when I think I brought it up at that point, and I said, this is a best practice. When is it a policy, when is it a practice? So no secrets, nothing, no backdoor conversation. I'm not that intriguing. That's where it came from. And that's where.
So maybe the difference is.
So is it, just so I'm clear, so what you're saying is that this is your concern because of the fact that we introduced a new policy about board orientation for new board members. That made you wonder about this?
No. So it made me wonder what is a best practice and what is a policy.
Are you talking about what was in that policy or the policy
I'm talking
itself?
about in general, going forward, general discussion.
Okay, so I happen to I agree with Amy on the concept that policies, well, I guess I'll say it this way. Best practices are memorialized by policy. Basically, they've got their legs in policy. So, but if you over-regulate, you can constrain yourself. And I mean, I was comfortable a few months ago with saying, you know, if we are bringing about a new policy, I think the litmus tests that we've already created, is it required by state law? Is there a pressing need? Is there a need, a perceived need that cannot already be addressed by some existing policy? So to the extent that we can address a need through an existing policy, I think we should. I just think that's efficient. But if there's a perceived need that comes from the administration, or, you know, some member of the board comes forward with a request that we consider a new policy, I think we already have the litmus test here, these questions here,
Absolutely. I think this has been very helpful.
to be rigorous with that. And ultimately, I feel like these are the types of questions that if we were to bring, you know, if somebody, I think the bus stop might be a perfect example of it. You know, is there a perceived need? Is there a reason that we would want a bus stop policy? Could that need be addressed through an existing policy? You know, as I said last week, I think to you, you know, if we're going to consider a new policy, what's the benefit to the district? You know, is there a benefit?
And that analysis of the data component.
Correct. And then I think also asking, you know, is it something that could be achieved with adjusting administrative regulations of an existing policy? I think that if we are willing to be rigorous as a committee with asking the questions, I actually think this is really helpful. That I think that we might find the balance, you know, between not over-regulating but memorializing best. I mean, I think ultimately, if we'd like someone to do it, it's a best practice. If we really want them to do it, we need a policy. I mean, that's kind of at the heart of it. Unless there's something else at the gut level, I think that that's ultimately, or if the state tells us we have to do it, then guess what? We have to do a policy. And I think that I'm comfortable with this being the additional kind of thought-provoking questions. I do, out of respect for the and I don't always do this, but I do want to let, if the public has anything they'd like to say, food for thought on this one, because we did structure it as a discussion. I don't know if there's anybody who wants to say anything about this in particular. Seems not. If we're comfortable with leaving it at that level.
I am.
Okay, there's two other things that kind of check mark that we made an agreement when we passed the public participation, the meetings and public participations policy back in December. We made an agreement, we discussed as a board that we wanted to kind of evaluate that. So I would like to make a book note that sometime in the fall, not during the summer when people are away, I'd like to try for us to think about a way to have a discussion on the agenda, maybe a meeting when we don't have a lot of heavy policy, to talk about how that's going. And make sure it is still, and we'll solicit some input from board members in some fashion. I don't know what that fashion will be. I'd like to do that. And I think, with that, we will ask for public comment. All right, thanks. Welcome back.
Judy Sherry, Governor's Circle, Newtown Square. When I was listening to the discussion about cross-referencing, which I mentioned in the beginning of the meeting, my impression from that discussion was that housekeeping, we just would take off the reference to the policy and not have to really change the policy. That was my impression from the discussion between Ms. Stern and the solicitor. But I would like to bring to the board's attention that oftentimes, as was the case in some of the policies you brought forward today, that the policies off to the side justify what you say in a policy. So if you just remove that, you're losing your justification for, you could potentially be losing your justification for what's said in the policy. In addition, if you just take off the number, that policy may be somewhere else, which was pointed out at the meeting. That might have been put in with another policy somewhere. So it cannot just be, let's take these policies where they're mentioned off.
Right.
Because they're off to the side. And while I'm on that, I think most of our policies list the justification to the side. Use of medication does not list policies on the side. It lists at the end of that policy legal references, and then lists board policies and public school code. So it seems to me that it's a departure from the typical way that we expect policies to be. I don't know if that was done for a
We're
reason.
bringing
but
that back for a first read. There's
Right.
a number of those kinds of things.
Yeah, so I would like to bring
Yep.
that forward
Yep.
as something else that should be under consideration. And while I'm on that policy, this special procedures section, which talks about this Narcan administration, it says at the end, under any circumstances, district professionals should contact 911 in case of suspected opiate overdose. And my question is, maybe because of my perspective, but are district professionals trained to recognize opiate overdoses? Because it seems to me that it is sort of implying that they would be able to recognize that and report it. And I don't know if they're trained in recognizing that. So those are my couple of comments there. My comment on the field trip section, page 1, it says the board does not endorse, support, nor assume responsibility in any way for any district employee,
Thank you.
bless you, who takes students on trips not approved by the board or superintendent or designee. No employee may solicit district students for such trips within district facilities or on district grounds without board permission. So I think that's a little confusing about it. I'm not, maybe it's not, but does this mean then that a teacher who wants to take students on trips first goes to the board for permission and wants to solicit in the school or in the classroom or have meetings there, which I think would probably be the case, would first then go to the board for permission to engage in that activity? And in a way, isn't that kind of an endorsement of the activity? I don't know. I'd be interested in hearing what you all think about that. But to me, if I were a parent and a teacher was offering a trip, which I think is, I think that's wonderful, really. It could be wonderful. And it was happening in Radnor School with a teacher from the district, I would sort of think that the district was endorsing it. I mean, I don't know, I doubt if I'd be reading this policy to find out, oh no, they're not endorsing it. So I just want to bring that forward. The other point, another point I wanted to make regarding policies. One of the reasons I ended up kind of back to my cross-referencing again was I happened to be looking at TE's website, and they just approved a new course called College and Career Transition, which I thought sounded very interesting. And it's a requirement for graduation, which changed the structure of the TE's graduation requirements. When I read that, I thought, I haven't heard recently about what our graduation requirements are. So when I looked back to see what our policy was about graduation requirements, I think that, it says it was adopted in 2008. So that's, a fairly long time ago. And there are no ARs posted next to graduation requirements. So I guess when Ms. Goldman mentioned, this could be in a handbook, which I'm assuming, it may be in the handbook. But to be consistent, and I hope I'm right on this because that's what I looked up, to be consistent, I think it should be reflected somehow next to the policy on graduation requirements. We should have an AR there that would reflect back what we say in the handbook.
Which policy was it?
217.
Thank you.
217 graduation requirements adopted in 2008.
That policy is referenced in the student handbook. I happen to know that. In the high school program of studies, actually.
Well, that's fine, but as I said, if I'm looking at the policy, there's no reference in the policy to, and maybe the board should actually take a look at what the requirements are right now to see, are they the best requirements for our students? I don't know. I haven't heard a discussion related to it, so I'm bringing it forward. I think that could be it. Related to public participation, I know that you mentioned having a number of people weigh in. Of course, you'd want the public, I'm sure, to weigh in about public participation. And in a meeting such as this, when you are discussing the policy itself, after you're finished discussing the policy, which has happened in the past in some of our meetings, it's a great opportunity for, at that point, if somebody has something to say related to it. Because if you have to wait till the end of the meeting to bring up things that were discussed an hour ago, it seems like it doesn't really belong. And also, everyone has to then kind of scramble through and try to find what's being referenced. So that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Do we have any other public comment? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Oh, my-